So, when you hear the word Leviticus, what comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's probably a dusty, ancient rulebook. Maybe a little confusing, right? But what if I told you it's actually a blueprint for one of the most profound relationships imaginable? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on Leviticus and discover this incredible guide to holiness. At its heart, the entire book is wrestling with this one massive question. Think about it. After everything that happened in Exodus, God's very presence is now living in a tent right in the middle of the Israelite camp. That's amazing, but it's also a huge problem. How can a pure, perfect, and life-giving presence exist alongside messy, imperfect, and mortal people without, destroying them? Leviticus is the answer to that question. And the key to that whole answer is this one word: holiness. Now, when we hear holy, we usually think morally perfect. But in Leviticus, that's not really the main idea. It means to be set apart, to be special and unique. God's holiness is his one-of-a-kind, powerful, life-giving essence. So for the people to be holy, they had to be set apart too, dedicated to God in every single part of their lives. So how does Leviticus lay all this out for us? Well, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the book's core purpose. Then we'll dive into 3 key ideas: the sacrificial rites for approaching God, the role of priests in purity, and something called the Holiness Code for daily life. And finally, we'll see how it all points to one powerful main message. Okay, so the purpose. Let's stick with this idea. God has moved into the neighborhood. He's literally right there in the tabernacle. This is an incredible but also pretty dangerous new reality. So Leviticus serves as the essential how-to guide, a blueprint for how this new relationship can actually work, and not just survive, but truly thrive. The first part of this blueprint deals with a really basic question: how can an imperfect person even get close to a holy God? Well, chapters 1 through 7 lay out a series of very specific, highly structured rituals, the sacrifices, that give people a safe and respectful way to enter God's presence. Now, these 5 offerings weren't just random. Think of them as 5 different kinds of communication. The burnt offering was like saying, "I'm all in. I dedicate myself completely to you." The grain offering was a way to say thank you for his provision. The peace offering was all about celebrating community and friendship with God. And then you had the sin and guilt offerings, which were the crucial ways of saying, "I'm sorry, I messed up, please forgive me." So you see, these sacrifices were deeply relational. They weren't just about following rules. They were real, tangible ways for people to say sorry, show they were thankful, and repair the connection that got broken when they made mistakes. This is how they kept their relationship with God healthy. But having rituals wasn't quite enough. You also needed special people to lead them and a certain state of being to even participate. And that brings us to our second big area, the priests, and all the laws about purity. God set apart a specific family, Aaron and his sons, to be the priests. They were the ultimate go-betweens. Because God's presence was so powerful, so intense, the priests acted as representatives who could enter that holy space for everyone else. They were literally bridging the gap between God and the people. Now, along with the priests, you have this idea of purity. And it's really easy to get this one wrong. Being unclean didn't mean you were sinful or physically dirty. It was more about order versus disorder. Coming into contact with things related to death or disease or even certain bodily fluids, it put you in a state of uncleanliness. It just meant you were temporarily excluded from the sacred space where God's life-giving presence was. It was a whole system of symbolic boundaries, all designed to protect that holy space. But this whole system creates a new problem. All the sins and impurities of the people would, symbolically, start to build up and pollute the camp. So, what do you do about that on a national scale? The book actually builds up to this one huge climactic day that's designed to solve this exact problem. The most important day for restoring purity was the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Just once a year, the high priest would go through this series of incredible rituals, entering the most holy place, the very center of God's presence, to atone for the sins of the entire nation. It was like a giant reset button, wiping the slate totally clean for the whole community. Okay, so we've got rituals for approaching God and priests to maintain the holy space. But here's the thing. Holiness was never meant to be contained inside the tabernacle, and that's where the third major section of Leviticus comes in. It's often called the Holiness Code, and it takes all these big ideas and applies them to everyday life. So in practice, what did being set apart actually look like? Well, it had huge implications for everything. It wasn't just about what foods you ate or the sacrifices you brought. It was about how you treated other people. It meant practicing social justice, upholding sexual morality, having fair business ethics, and, this one is huge, showing radical care for the poor and for foreigners. This code is pretty brilliant, really. It took the high-minded concept of holiness and made it incredibly practical. It connected what happened in the tent of worship with what happened in the village market. All of a sudden, how you treated your neighbor was just as much an act of worship as offering a sacrifice was. So this brings us to the main event, the core message of the whole book. We've seen the what, the sacrifices, the priests, the codes, but now we finally get to the why. Why do all of this? What is the ultimate motivation driving this entire thing? It all comes down to this single powerful command, and it's repeated all through the book. Be holy, for I am holy. That's the core logic. The Israelites weren't just following a random list of rules. They were being called to imitate the very character of the God who had saved them and was now living right there among them. And what was that character like? Well, it was a character of justice, of generosity, of order, and of life. By living this way, by being set apart, Israel was meant to become a living, breathing picture of God's goodness to all the other nations around them. Their entire way of life was supposed to be a beacon, showing the world who their God was. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question for ourselves. If holiness at its very core means being set apart to reflect a character of justice, generosity, and community, what would that actually look like today? What does it really mean for us to be holy, right here in our world?